My name is Cameron. I go by Venus Theory. I'm a composer, sound designer, and content creator based out of my home studio here in Nashville, Tennessee. These days, most of my work is composing for things like video games and media, and I also do quite a bit of sound design work for companies in the music industry doing sounds and presets and things like that. I got my start with UVI 7 years ago now, I think, with Falcon, and that has remained indispensable to me ever since, both for music and sound design. It's just very, very good. Recently, my wife and I have been rewatching Stranger Things, and in this video, I thought it would be fun to break down a couple cues inspired by the work of Kyle Dixon and Michael Stein. The Stranger Things soundtrack is so good. There's so many great analog synth things, and it just oozes atmosphere and has a lot of really fun sound design work as well if you listen closely to a lot of the underbeds in the score. There are a few different core types of cues in the series, and I thought it would be fun to break them apart and analyze just sort of the how and why of the way they're put together. In this session, I used a lot of my favorite UVI soundwares, things like Synth Anthology 4, JP Legacy, Sunbox, Quadra, and a lot of the effects and stuff as well to mix everything and really pull it together. So let's hop in and break it down. The first cue is the kids here. This is sort of a main theme. The second cue here is an action section, just something with a little bit more driving and pacing to it. And then the third section here is the monster, and more of a kind of dark, ambient-y thing. And I think these three represent the sort of major music archetypes you hear throughout the show. The first one, the kids theme here, is just sort of a character theme thing, and they seem to rely a lot on a chord progression and bass line, a repeating arpeggio, and then sort of a repeating motific element. The first thing I called up here, just a nice warm pad sound coming from JP Legacy. That was really the basis for everything here, and then I used PX Sunbox just to set the main theme here with the preset Poly 87. I found this preset called Trumpet in JP Legacy, which sounds like this. And I tweaked a few things here just to make it a little more in line with the flow of the sound I wanted, and when you put the two together, that really starts to sell the idea. For the arpeggio line here, I made this sound in Mosaic, and I also played this in by hand. Just a really nice sparkly sound that adds some cool dimension to everything and fills out the high end. For a little bit of ambience, I used Drone and PX Sunbox here. Sunbox is just doing a little bit of a ARP thing just to add some pacing, and Drone is just adding some atmosphere. Of course, we need a big bass to solidify everything here, and this came from Synth Anthology 4. And I mean, like, whew, like that's a really great sound. With all that put together, I went in and did quite a bit of automating just to move things around and really keep things alive and organic. So putting all that together, we now have the completed cue for the kids theme. The next cue is an action cue, and in the show, I thought it was fun how they approached action music differently. Instead of having big, driving combat drums and stuff, they used a lot of cool, pretty simple sounds just to really give the show a different feeling when it came to action sequences. For the drum sounds, I combined Primate with the Emulator 2 drum kit inside of that, and I layered them together to create this. On top of the Primate kit, I added tape delay and plate. Since the groove is pretty sparse, this just kind of helps to make it move along a bit more and adds a bit more of a sense of syncopation to it. The core part of the action cue is really just a couple pads. I have one here from Mercury 80 and one from Saturn 4, which are in JP Legacy, that sound like this. And I'm really just using those to build up and kind of fill everything out underneath the bigger elements that are happening. The two main action elements actually come from Quadra-Modular and USQ1 here. So Quadra-Modular is adding a sequence and USQ1 is doing a sort of arpeggiated line on top that, again, just kind of keeps repeating over and over as a lot of the major scores of that era do. To finish things out, I needed another big bass sound, and I noticed in the soundtrack, during action scenes especially, they tend to distort synths quite a bit just to really make them sound huge. So I found this preset called Dirty One inside of JP Legacy that is just absolutely ridiculous, but it sounds great. Throwing all that together, now we have the action cue section. The last section here is called the monster, and I noticed that for the monster themes, or just for themes representing the area of the upside down, there's a lot more atonality and a lot of microtonal stuff as well, which is super fun and always kind of an interesting challenge to experiment with if you're primarily a melodic or, harmonically driven composer. It's a really fun challenge just to move away from that and figure out how can you tell a story solely using sounds and the kind of textures that it has. The core of this section is built up around two pads, one from drone and one from Noctua. One is very crispy and sort of has a tone to it, and the other is much more atonal. This doesn't sound like much, but it did act as an effective bed to kind of pin a couple elements on top of. The first element I needed was the monster theme, and this comes from Noctua here. It needed a little bit of extra funk to it though, so I used the tape chorus and tape delay plugins on this just to space it out and make it feel a little more uncomfortable. So just making things a little more lively and adding a tiny pinch of spice on top, I guess. When I was playing it back, I figured I didn't want to start with that right away. I wanted to kind of hint at it first, which they do a lot in the show. So I used this sound from HX20 called Dreaming Snowflakes and played these lines in again, but just with a different sound. There's also quite a bit of found sound sampling and other creative uses of sampling in the score. So I used the emulation soundware here with the big taiko drums and ran that through Opal just for kind of a lo-fi crushed sample feel, just to add some deep percussion, and it turned out really cool. The last thing I needed was just some low bass, so I found this preset in HX20 called Cherry Bass, which sounded cool, but I thought it needed just a little bit more weight. So I opened Falcon and used the analog mono starting point just to build my own patch. So I created a sine wave sub bass here, and there's just a little bit of distortion and stuff going on. But I also layered that with some brown noise. This is a trick a friend of mine told me a long time ago, where if you want a sub bass to have a little more character and feel really intimidating rather than just a sine wave, you can just slam some noise with that into a filter, and it sounds absolutely huge after just a pinch of saturation or something happening. There are very few things in music more effective for adding low end than just a sine wave. It really does work every time. And with all that and a little bit of automation on top, we now have our monster cue. When it comes to mixing, just like most other things in my life, very much a minimalist, and I like to keep things very simple. If you take a look in the session, there's really not a lot going on here, and this is because of the way that my production mentor taught me mixing, which is faders and panning first, then high pass and low pass as much as you can, then do any EQ stuff, then do compression, and that's it. So I'm very hands-off with it, and I like to just do as little as possible most of the time. If we turn off all the mixing stuff and listen to a couple of the cues, you'll hear that they sound a little maybe flat. Like that works. The action cue. It's all right, and then the monster cue. It's also pretty functional, and I like to work this way as much as I can, and it's mostly just a matter of thinking that arrangement is really your best mixing tool. For the EQ for every channel, shade is doing all the heavy lifting, and it generally starts like this, where I'll add a high pass and a low pass filter and just remove as much information as I can. And with EQ alone, if you listen to like the action section, already sounds so much cleaner and just more alive and has more definition. And I think that's the magic of really trying to not rely on fixing things in the mix. The only other thing going on in the session is just two sends, one for delay from tape delay and one for reverb coming from plate. And these aren't doing a ton, it's just adding a bigger sense of space to the mix by sending a few key elements to them. And then I'm also sending the delay send into the reverb send a bit just to make it nice and super lush and 80s-ish. Comparing this to where we started, if we take a listen to the kids section here, you can hear how much more big it sounds. I don't really know a better way to put it than that, but it's just simple choices like this that compound to make something really feel alive and convincing. These cues were a lot of fun to make, and hopefully you enjoyed this session breakdown, and maybe it gives you a couple ideas to try out in your own productions. Everything you heard in this video was made using UVI SonicBundle, and if you want to check it out for yourself, you could find it with the links down in the description below.